Welcome to this latest edition in our video interview series here at iConnect. My name is Richard Albert, and today I'm joined by David and Susan Williams of the Center for Constitutional Democracy at Indiana University. And what we're going to do today is talk about the work of the center, its origins, and you'll also get to meet the two people behind the center and the very interesting work that the center does around the world. So with that, I welcome our viewers and welcome to you, David and Susan. It's a pleasure to have you for a few moments today.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's begin with the center. What work does the center do?
So we do two types of work. We go out into the world and work with foreign reformers who are pondering the future of their country. And we help them to kind of structure their decision-making process. We never, ever tell them what to do, but we help them to see what the options are. And we hear about their problems and how constitutions might be useful to deal with those problems. We then come back here, and the other work we do is conventional legal scholarship, but on the subject of constitutional design. We take what we have learned in the world and we try to translate it into a kind of scholarly record that we hope will help people think about the way the constitutions are made and how they can be useful.
So you go out in the world and you help people think about the constitutional reform process, the constitution making process. How do people engage you as advisors, as consultants? How do they find you? Do you find them? Do they find you?
They find us. We've never done any effort to actually publicize the center at all, and we haven't had to. And I believe partially that's because, as Richard, you know, there are relatively few people in the world doing this kind of stuff. So if you start asking around, if in good faith some foreign reformer wants some advice from an expert, there's a limited number of places to go. And so we started in this because I had a Burmese graduate student who really wanted to engage us. We started work with Burma. Before long, people in Liberia had heard we were doing this work, and they wanted to come and cause us to work in Liberia and South Sudan, Yemen, Libya, Vietnam. A large number of countries just kind of hear that you're in the water.
We're a little different from the other options in advising, constitutional advising. We don't work for the UN. We don't work for the US State Department. We don't have the sort of political limitations and baggage that experts that come through those channels often have. We view ourselves as lawyers, and we view our partners on the ground in these various countries as our clients. And so our goal is to help them figure out what it is they need to deal with the challenges they're facing and to help them implement it as effectively as possible.
And the other difference from some people is that we're not trying to do work in a very large number of countries. We feel we can't. Because in order to do good work, you really have to understand the country, you have to understand its problems and its potentials, and you have to develop networks of trust over time so that people think that you understand what they're really going through and what they care about. And so we've been involved in a number of countries, but not so many. We don't just kind of fly in and do a week-long seminar in Haiti or Morocco or something like that. We have to know people on the ground to be able to do good work.
And our preference is to make a long-term commitment so that we can work with people over years as conditions change. And indeed, we've been active in Burma for over 15 years now.
15 years now.
Okay. So what interests me is to know how one gets involved in this work of constitutional design. You didn't go to school to become constitutional designers. You both graduated from the Harvard Law School. You both won the Sears Prize, first and second in the class, which is an unbelievable story. You both then went on to clerk for now Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and now you're in the faculty at Indiana University in Bloomington. But you didn't study this in law school.
Sure didn't. It really wasn't possible when we were in law school. Nobody taught con design. We now teach a number of courses on con design here at IU, but we had to make them up from scratch. And the reason we got involved is some wonderful people from Burma asked us to get involved. That's the reason. And they took our hearts, and we've never had them back. And so we do this work because we have friends abroad who are brave and idealistic and want a better future for their country. And for one reason or another, think we might be able to help. And so that's how we ended up going into it.
And it really has been an incredibly steep learning curve. It's
for a while we were faking it.
Yeah, right. And the experience of going to meet with our partners and having someone say, well, how should we do X, or how might we think about this, and having to say,
don't have any idea.
I really don't know.
There's no writing on that at all. And that's part of what's wonderful about being engaged in the world, is that they bring to us problems that we can then think about that not so many people are thinking about, because you have to really be engaged in the world to realize this is the problem, right? This is one of the things that is pressing for foreign reformers.
So you have built your expertise as you've gone along, as problems have been presented to you and as requests for help have been made to you.
Yes.
That is exactly right.
Oh,
and that's what's great about having a center, which is we have a number of affiliated faculty. We have 12 PhD students in law and democracy, and we have a number of affiliated JD students. And all of those help with gathering the knowledge we need to be able to do work abroad. So it's very common that we'll be abroad, we'll bring students with us, they'll have to do research on the spot, or we'll email back home and ask a team back here to find the knowledge that we need to have.
Okay.
Now, we did both start out with areas of interest, and the things we focus on in our advising work are connected to the areas of scholarly interest that we had to start with. David does a great deal of work on structure and electoral systems, and sort of focused work on democratic forms for dealing with ethnic and religious and racial diversity. I have written on gender issues, and what happens when you get involved in a country is people come up with gender issues that, from an American constitutionalist perspective, you had no thought about. Things like plural legal systems, customary law and religious law systems, things like electoral gender quotas. And so we've both sort of branched out from our core interests to related areas that are applicable to our advising work.
But whenever somebody out there thinks up a new problem, a new issue, a new collection of concerns, somebody in the center is going to be tasked with being our local expert.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned, David, the PhD in law and democracy. This strikes me as something unique, certainly in the United States. Can you tell us a bit about the degree and what kind of students it attracts and what kind of work they do?
Yeah, so we believe that it is unique, and Susan actually is the director of graduate studies, so I'll ask her to answer that question.
So it is a really unusual program, it is a PhD in constitutional design. That is the focus. Our belief is that in order to do constitutional design, you need to study more than law, and so it is a fundamentally interdisciplinary degree. Students take courses in political science and anthropology and area studies in the part of the world that they want to specialize in. We require a geographical focus. They're required to show language proficiency in the country they want to work in. They're required to do an externship with a law reform organization in that country, and an internship working with us at the center with our partners elsewhere in the world. So the goal is for a student to graduate with both a multidisciplinary theoretical tool set and real practical experience in doing constitutional reform on the ground. We have students both from the US and from a lot of other countries. Currently, as David says, we're at the level we have been shooting for. It's still a relatively new program, about 6 years old. But we're now at a full complement of 12 students. About half of them are from other countries. We have students from Pakistan. 2
Pakistani law professors.
From Afghanistan.
Who did work in gender equity in the vice president's office.
From China, from Korea.
A senior legal advisor to the Korean parliament.
And several more.
A retired colonel from the US Army who ran the reconciliation program in Iraq.
Right.
And wanted to come here to think about how to run a better reconciliation program so he could go back, and that's what he's writing his dissertation about.
Student from Croatia. So it's truly global, and that is wonderful because we see both the ways in which the problems are different and the ways in which the problems are similar. And the students learn a great deal from each other as well as from us.
We have our own building, so there's a place where they can gather, and we have a weekly speaker series. So the same people turn up every single week to have conversations with each other. And this has been a great blessing for Susan and me because it's a true intellectual community. You know, one hopes that one's faculty is like that, but it's not always so, particularly because people have different interests. But people in the CCD, they all tend to think they're a little bit odd in being in law school because they don't want to go out and practice business law. They want to do something else. But they feel odd in the same way. So we all get to be odd together.
I think it's extraordinary to have a program like that, this PhD program, where they're learning from the books, but then they're learning in the field with you.
They have
Exactly.
to. They have to.
Exactly. And that's the feedback loop David was talking about at the beginning is the basis both for our own work and for our understanding of this degree program. And part of what we did, we were doing the work in the world for a while before we developed the PhD program. And part of what we did was we sat down and we said, what do we wish someone had taught us before we got started doing this?
So we would not feel inadequate, which we still do.
Right. You know, what are the things we wish we had had the chance to learn? And so we designed a curriculum around that, and that's how the interdisciplinarity grew up. And then the students effectively are doing the same thing we are. They are sort of reading the books and learning the theory, and then they are seeing it in action and reflecting back on it.
Amazing, amazing. I want to ask maybe two questions, and let's maybe take one at a time. The first is going to be about your reflections on the state of the scholarship in constitutional design today. And the second question, I'd like to be about the actual process of advising and how it works. So the first, what is the state, in your view, of the scholarship on constitutional design? Do you read scholarship and often say, you know what, this is interesting in theory, but I've done it, and it doesn't actually work this way?
Absolutely. So there are two problems with the scholarship. Number one is it's severely underdeveloped. There's a lot of stuff we need to know that we don't know. And so con design, as you know, is really kind of coming into being. And there are huge holes that are being filled in, and we would like to play at least a small role in trying to fill in those holes, as would our students. We now have an online journal, the Indiana Journal of Constitutional Design, to try to do that, to try to help with that. So we just don't know enough. That's a big piece of it. And as to your second point, which is, yeah, you read stuff and kind of like it sounds coherent, it sounds reasonable, but wow, it's really not what happens in the world. We run into this all the time. And that's because, again, if you're not out there, usually you're in the faculty lounge arguing with other intellectuals. And so you're going to think in terms of Marxist scholarship or feminist scholarship or postmodernist scholarship or something like that. People out there, you know what they're worried about? They're worried about beating themselves. They're worried about corruption. They're worried about being beaten by the police. Gives you a very different prism to view the world through.
And so what kind of advice do you want to give to scholars? Because most of our readers and viewers are interested in how constitutions work, how to make them better. Though not everyone wants to make them better for the same purpose, right? We come at it from different perspectives.
Right. And I should be clear, when we do work in the world, we view ourselves as being at the service of our partners. That what we do is we look around and see if there's somebody we want to work with. If there's not, we're not going to do work in that country. It's only when there's somebody that we consider to be brave and idealistic and fundamentally committed to a better future for their country. Then and only then do we do that. Okay? So we're not going out to impose our view. We're going out to try to help them realize their dreams through constitutional tools.
Okay. So what kind of cautionary words, Susan, might you give to scholars who are really deeply committed to this idea of constitutional design and to producing scholarship that helps to move the ball forward however they want it to be moved? Do you have any caution?
Rather than frame it as cautionary, I would actually frame it as a request. What we could really use, what would be incredibly helpful, would be for people to be talking across the normal silos in which a lot of the research takes place. So, for example, there are a number of people who do work on very nuts and bolts constitutional process issues, right? And they tend to be policy-oriented think tank type organizations, people like Interpeace or IDEA. And they give actual reformers advice about how to set up a process. Very close to the ground sort of advice.
And very important.
And very important, very useful. Then there's an enormous political theory literature, right, on democracy and models of democracy and deliberation and all the rest of that. There's remarkably little conversation across this boundary, right? I would love to be able to read more about how you take some of those theoretical models and you actually bring them to bear on constitutional processes directly. So it's that kind of conversation across boundaries that I think is really crucial. And it's understandable that in the early stages of the area of scholarship, condesign as a legal matter is still very new. Political scientists have been writing about it for a long time, lawyers for a lot less time. It's understandable that we would still be building that. That's the sort of connection that I would really like to see.
And of course, the next generation of constitutional advisors will be well served by the program that you've built.
That's our hope. That's why we set the program up. That's right. That is, early on, we thought about whether this was just going to be our personal work. But then we thought, we're actually learning stuff out in the world that it's very hard to learn. And we would love to gather some people around us who've had some experience also doing it, but also want to help us think through the problems. And so, we have graduates from our program now who are in significant positions around the world. One of our doctoral students was, until recently, the head of the Law Reform Commission in Liberia. So he was tasked with revising the Liberian Constitution. One of our ex-students is one of the chief negotiators for the ethnic minorities in Burma's long-standing negotiations toward peace. A bunch of our students are now in various government positions in a number of countries around the world. So, if we have any lasting impact, I suspect it will be through them.
Can we move on to the second question? Your work has taken you around the world. You have worked in Liberia, in Burma, in South Sudan, maybe Puerto Rico. You're going to shortly, perhaps.
Shortly.
Jordan, a number of places around the world. Could you just walk us through how a typical, maybe there is no typical, but how an engagement works, start to finish?
So let's take Burma, because it's changed in Burma. Early on, what happened was that some of the ethnic minorities wanted to draft state constitutions for their respective ethnic states in Burma. So we would read those constitutions and we would talk with them about the choices that were to be made. The very first time we ever did this, we met in the jungle outside of Chiang Mai, Thailand, to meet with all of these drafters. And so we focused on that. Then a bunch of them got together and decided they wanted to draft a model union constitution for the country, not the actual constitution, but something that was aspirational. So we worked with them about that. Then it became plain that if there was going to be an actual peace settlement in Burma, the guys with the guns would have to come in. And so for a time, I would walk across the border in the company of an armed guard to meet with the commanding generals of the ethnic resistance armies, just to make sure they had a basic understanding of the choices in front of them. Because if they didn't feel they had a good deal, they were just going to go back into the hills after peace came. And to know they had a good deal, they'd have to know enough about con design to understand, yeah, this is a good deal. So we did that for a while. Now, all of these would be, there was a time when we would go to Southeast Asia, we would be there for 10 weeks at a time, no longer. Things have changed. Because now what's happening is there are actual negotiations in Burma between the ethnic resistance forces and the government. So now what tends to happen is we'll go in for a week. To be blunt, we go to a tourist class hotel. We didn't used to do this at all. I used to sleep on the jungle floor. Now we go to a tourist class hotel for a week. We basically never leave the hotel because we're meeting with our friends and we're helping them think about the choices that are going to come up at the next round of negotiations. So at this point in Burma, it's exceedingly practical and exceedingly focused. What's happening next?
Okay. And so I get now, Susan, now you explain that you build relationships that endure over time, you build trust, and people come back to get more advice and more ideas about how to think through and work through the problems that they'll be confronting in the process of negotiation and design.
Exactly. I mean, we were just this week talking to someone in Jordan, because that's a country we are expecting to visit soon. And she said to us, "So what is your plan for Jordan?" And we laughed. And we said, "We don't have a plan for Jordan. Actually, what we would like to do on this first trip is just talk to people and spend most of our time listening to what you have to tell us about what the challenges are facing Jordan, what's working and what's not working, what are people frustrated with, what are people proud of." We ask a huge number of questions. And so it takes a long time to get to a point where we actually know enough about the situation, all the players, the various issues that divide them, to start saying, well, okay, it looks like you have three choices that you should consider on this particular issue. Mm-hmm. And here are the advantages and disadvantages of each. We're very allergic to the idea of best practices for almost everything in constitutional design. We firmly believe that a constitution has to be built from the ground up, tailor-made to an individual country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it seems that many of the jurisdictions where you work, or perhaps we might describe them as reconstructive democracies or as democracies in formation.
Yes.
New and struggling is a phrase we often use.
New and struggling. Have you worked with democracies, established democracies?
You mean like the U.S.?
Well,
for the first time last year.
Is it still a democracy? I don't.
Yeah, right.
For the first time last year in my con design class, there was a Team USA. That in my con design class, I break them down into teams and they study new and struggling democracies. And I always said it's going to have to be new and struggling democracies. We're not going to go try and do work in Norway. They don't need us. But for the first time, you know, the U.S., clearly things are changing radically here. Everything that we took for granted has started to shift. And so I had a Team USA, and it may be that the CCD will do some work in the USA. But to be honest, typically we don't work with established democracies because the places where we go, of necessity, things are fluid. Things are up for grabs. They're struggling and trying to figure out what they want to do. If they're very well established, like the U.S., the Constitution is probably going to be fairly well entrenched. And that means there's no real prospect for reform. So it will be in places like Liberia, Libya, Yemen, South Sudan, Burma, Vietnam, where things are actually changing that we might become involved.
David and Susan, this has been wonderful, but I don't want to let you go just yet. I want to ask one more question, because many of the readers and viewers that I connect are graduate students, doctoral students, new professors, writing about constitutional design on really fascinating questions. Now, since you're on the ground in many of these places and seeing new questions appear before you, before we even know they exist as questions in the scholarly world, what kind of questions do you think are worth academic attention? So if you were to advise a graduate student, a doctoral student, a new professor, established professors, in maybe new and important questions or questions that need attention from scholars in constitutional design, constitution making, what might a few of them be?
Well, all right. So one of my favorites, because I tried to do research on it a few years back and found so little, is the intersection between states of emergency and federal systems. There's a real large literature on states of emergency. There's an enormous literature on federalism. But thinking about the particular problems created by establishing a state of emergency provision in a constitution in a federal state, and the ways of handling those problems, there's remarkably little out there on that. And I think that's a very interesting question, and one that would actually bear a lot of different approaches, right? This is not one project. This is potentially a sort of a small field.
But the truth is, it would be easier to talk about the areas that have been adequately covered than the areas that have not. Because there's so much of the territory out there is unmapped. And I'll give you just one example. In federal systems, there's this question that if the federal government passes a constitutional law, and the state passes a contrary constitutional law, which is supreme. In the US, of course, it's always the federal law, but it need not be so. And a few years back, one of my graduate students wrote the first ever kind of synopsis of the way that different federal systems handle this problem. Now, there was nothing on it. I was shocked to discover there was nothing on it, because it's a hugely important question. Revenue sharing and resource sharing. Does money stay close to the ground, or does the federal government take it all away and give it to the cronies? Over and over again, what we see is that what's really missing is actually the most basic stuff. We end up calling these taxonomies, that what we want to see is a taxonomy of revenue sharing schemes. How do different countries do it? Because that's the first stage. If we can get a map of the landscape, that 62 countries do it this way and 37 do it that way. Electoral commissions, how do you structure electoral commissions? There's just that information is available, but it's never been synthesized. And so just making available the basic data would be enormously useful. The next stage, of course, is after you develop a taxonomy, after you see the landscape, then you start to talk about, okay, what kind of a system works well under what conditions?
And is this the kind of work that you're publishing in the new Indiana Journal of Constitutional
Yes,
Science?
that's exactly
That's
the kind of
exactly
work.
what we're hoping to do.
Okay, and it's a new journal. How old is it?
Oh, I think we have an issue and a half out at the moment. It's
Brand new.
basic.
Brand new.
Yes, brand new.
Brand new, as of last spring. Spring.
Okay, great. Well, we'll link to it.
Great.
We'll publish this video. We'll
Sure.
also link to the CCD website. What a
Terrific.
fascinating and important center and the work that you do. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
spending time
You're
with.
very welcome, and thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Great to
Thank
talk
you very much, David and Susan.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.